Okay, we wanted to first start with basically just an overview of what ZK is and what it provides, because some understanding of that will be necessary to fully reason about all the different schemes we'll present. So one way of viewing ZK is basically in the current data paradigm, there's a handful of large platforms like Facebook or Meta, Google, Amazon that own basically all of your personal data and profit off of it as they desire. And they make like hundreds of billions of dollars. This is like maybe the most successful internet business ever. In a ZK data paradigm, the sort of ownership and sort of like entire system flips, where you get to own your personal data and you verifiably share it with platforms you trust. So instead of basically Facebook making all the different claims it wants to about you, you can directly talk to people about the sorts of things that you've done, the sorts of reputation you've accrued. So what does ZK need to work? The data that you're making proofs about needs some form of provenance. And the simplest method here is you essentially have data that is attached with signatures from some trusted source. Without any signatures, data is basically meaningless to a platform, as like you can forge any like text basically. And using ZK, you can reveal this, very similar to the NFC, and we'll review the NFC stuff in a bit. You reveal you have a valid signature with some sort of attestation without revealing anything else. And from this signature sort of base layer, you can start to build sort of more complex claims about yourself. So what benefits could ZK give us? Or sort of why is this interesting? In a world in which we own our own data, there's a lot of different things. I think one thing is just a general sort of like consent-based feeling around data. Instead of just sort of being default signed up to like basically three main providers, you can choose the platforms whose trade-offs and values work for you, and you can give your data to them or reveal certain parts of it. You can change platforms more easily. When you have ownership over your data, you can basically move to somebody else if a platform starts to do things you don't like, or you don't trust them, or you think another platform would do better with your data. Sort of on like a vibes level, you can like reclaim humanity, dignity, and control over every single interaction you take. We're basically living in a world where everything we do online and basically in person is tracked and watched by like many people. And there's something like deeply invasive and sort of like invasive about that, or whatever. And I think there's a general feeling, or like the way we use the internet and we interact with each other in person, the vibes of that could feel very different in a world in which we have more ownership. And potentially, the sort of main topic of this talk is: can we potentially take back some of this hundreds of billions of dollars that platforms make off of your data in a world where we own it? Okay.
Sweet. So first we'll be discussing a little bit about some primitives, and then we'll move into broader applications that use primitives and some of the ZK tech that we'll discuss. And then finally, we'll have small sessions where people can discuss in small groups. We want this to be more interactive, so we're thinking maybe like you just kind of talk to your neighbor about what you thought, and then just kind of ask questions, and we kind of have like this open room where people are discussing and thinking about how these things can impact us. And so when we go over the primitives, these are basically going to be around the provenance question. So how do we actually get those signatures? Because most of the time, the data that we have does not come with signatures. So how can we kind of get that provenance without completely rehauling every system for people to add those signatures? So one way to do this is via emails. So for instance, because all of your emails are signed with an RSA signature, you could, for instance, prove that data and programmably decide which information you want to reveal and which information you don't, and that can prove certain information about yourself. And so the way this works is all of your emails have a signature of the hash, and you can make a ZK proof about that information. This allows you to then programmably choose, oh, I want to reveal only my name. Oh, I want to reveal only my country. Oh, I want to reveal only this information that someone in my email has attested to. Maybe I only want to reveal the number of Twitter followers I have from an attested email from Twitter. And this means that we don't have to trust some centralized attester to attest this data. You can trust the original source of that data. And so the way this would work is you put your email into the email prover, you prove it locally, and reveal only the specific details, maybe the from email, and you can prove that wherever you'd like. It can be on a blockchain or it can be anywhere else. Verifying off-chain data, you can do this on, for instance, Twitter email looks like this. It allows you, we have a demo that lets you extract a username. You can also do things like emails about flights or emails about taxes and extract any information about things like residence or anything else that might be useful to a platform that you're interacting with. You can also send money. So for instance, one of the problems with a lot of these systems, especially crypto native, is that it's really hard to transact because people don't want to like onboard onto crypto system. And so being able to send money between email addresses is a fairly powerful primitive that allows this to be a lot more accessible to normal people. We have a demo, and these are, you know, a number of things you could do. You can imagine any of the information in your email can be used as this data that you're using to prove things about yourself, and then as a result, opt into these systems or share data specifically. So for instance, we discussed flight social media, residence organization, organization meaning like I work at this company, allowing you to do things like whistleblowing or something, or attach credibility and reputation to your speech, credit score and donations.
A lot of you will have just seen this talk, so this is going to be a review, and that it's going to be literally the same slides. But another primitive that we think is going to be really important to basically give people signatures or data with provenance to make proofs about is in this NFC form factor. So yeah, basically, I won't go on this for too long since a lot of this will be review, but we are attempting to essentially digitize in-person interactions in a way where the user has ownership. And we think that a lot of these are very good fits for like personal ownership because all of your in-person interactions are very personal and special and shouldn't be default owned by somebody else. How does it work? I'll go through this again really quickly. And also, there's a demo on the door. You can basically collect a roughly like an attestation of actually going to Public Goods Day at Zuconnect. So on each tap, there's an NFC chip that gives out unique signatures from a private key on the card. If you register the public key of the card or chip with some meaning, in this case, for example, like, you know, attending the Public Goods Day at Zuconnect, then proving you have a valid signature from that card's public key means that you did actually go to this event, because the only way to get valid signatures is to actually tap this card. So the near field part of NFC, it stands for near field communication, is very key here because we can basically only get the signature by being in person. In very simple terms, basically the chip produces unique signatures that have meaning. Only you will ever see the signature, and you can use ZK to reveal you have a meaningful signature without giving it away. As a result, people can't steal your reputation, powers, attestations, credentials, whatever you want to call it. What can we build? Basically, yeah, we have an example of an event card. I have a personal card, which is more or less a proof of meeting me. There's like visiting a specific space, and there's also sort of like more qualitative or like human-based attestations, like for example, that you are a great community member. It's a very hard thing to like digitize and like celebrate, but is very, very a good fit for sort of this particular form factor of like a community leader can come up to you, basically give you a tap to, you know, give you whatever sort of unlocks or access that, you know, being a great community member should give you. So from there, we're going to transition basically to, on this data layer and other sort of existing stuff, what sorts of applications can we build that relate to the commons? We're going to start with proof of humanity and KYC, which is a really important primitive in a lot of sort of public goods funding schemes, is you want to make sure that these things aren't botted. And I'm going to start with some ways that ZK can build schemes like this.
Cool. So there's a number of schemes that you can use to get proof of humanity on varying scales. And you can imagine the difference between these schemes and previous schemes is that you want, in a lot of these systems, you want to prove that you're a specific person, but you don't want to reveal who you are because that's too much data. And so there's a number of schemes. For instance, proof of your passport. For Japan, India, and the EU, there's a number of PSC projects that actually have anonymous proof of passport proofs. And so you can prove you're a citizen of this country without revealing who you are, which is extremely powerful because these passports come with signatures. In addition, you can do, for instance, soft proof of humanity. So instead of doing, I am a unique human as attested to by this country's government, you can say, hey, I am a human who on Gitcoin, on my on-chain registry, I have a matching of 1.5. And you don't prove anything else. You can just prove that this exists on-chain. And you can build this primitive with something like Axiom. And this is like also quite interesting because you can get soft KYC that anyone can opt into without having to be in one of these regions. You can also do proof of existing KYC providers. So for instance, Airbnb and Coinbase do KYC, and you can just prove that you have a valid KYC confirmation from any of these providers, allowing you to like transfer that KYC attestation into any other platform you'd like. And as Vivek mentioned, NFC allows you to say also a soft proof of humanity that, hey, I went to this in-person event, or I went to these 10 in-person events, or I have these signatures from these attestations from these 10 people. And that also lets you say, hey, I am probably a real human. And so depending on the scale that you want KYC, whether you want it to be attested to by a company, ID, government, whatever, or if you want it to be softer, there's a number of ways you can do this. And this is going to be one of the bedrocks of how we actually create these anonymous primitives that let you do things within communities. So.
So then another application that we have around the idea of using ZK to achieve data sovereignty on social platforms is something called zero-knowledge data guilds. So currently the way that the advertising model works on a platform like Facebook, Google, Twitter, Instagram, whatever, is you're a user, you have data, you give it to the platform, and then advertisers basically buy the data or buy the right to serve ads to people with particular data. And obviously that's like not private at all. So theoretically, in a world where users own all of their own signed data, there's no reason to necessarily have that model of like Facebook or Google being the middleman. You can sell your data directly to advertisers. Amazing. We've created the Torment Nexus. In practice, this doesn't really work. You don't get a lot of money. Microtransactions are not like particularly efficient or worthwhile. And it doesn't really help because advertisers get your data, they can build a profile about you over time, and then your data is not necessarily economically valuable to them anymore. So one alternative is to sort of split this up and add an aggregation layer such that users have data, but instead of it directly flowing either to the platform and then to the advertiser or directly to the advertiser, we add a new primitive of data guilds. And a guild in this case is some not even necessarily homogeneous group of people, just a group of users who want to capture some of the value that they're extracting from the selling of their own data. So why is this promising? One, because you get an additional layer of privacy because the users can either submit data directly to the guild or submit a more obfuscated ZK proof that I have attested data on the platform that shows I've had this type of activity, and that is relatively close to the vector of activity that an advertiser is interested in. Or you can abstract that out even more and say I have these proof carrying data or PCDs. You can use NFCs for this. You can kind of use any primitive for this. And then aggregate that to the guild layer, and then the guild sends a ZK proof to the advertiser hey, our users on average have this data profile, or alternatively, we have a group of users that you give us ads and we'll serve the ads to those users with a match of the relevance of an ad to a user of at least some certain average. So the implementation details of this aren't super important, but the idea is this data sovereignty allows for a lot of different models that aren't just user data directly to advertiser or user data to platform to advertiser. And then the way that we look at the economics of this, because we still kind of have the problem of this isn't a life-changing amount of money for an individual user. It's on the order of tens or dozens of dollars per year per platform per user. And so if that aggregates to the guild, then that introduces another an economy of scale in the same way that you would get from a social platform having an economy of scale. But this is less user hostile because a guild, unlike a social platform, doesn't have network effect switching costs. And so if a guild isn't paying you out as much value as you'd like, or isn't trading your data as securely as you'd like, it's this whole other layer where you can switch within that, as opposed to having to convince you and all your friends to leave Twitter and join Mastodon or something. So this is basically rehashing that, and then it also allows us to break up monopolies that cause Google, et cetera, to capture most of the market share of the value of your data. So, how much time do we have left? Okay, so we're pretty good on time. So we're gonna open it up to discussion topics, which can feel free to ask a couple of questions to us, and then we can split off into small groups. But there's still definitely a lot of open design questions around these. We kind of want to underscore the main like themes that ZK tech allows people to unlock, and the big one I think is just having data sovereignty available to the individual, and also having instead of just one privacy model, having a spectrum of privacy so that you can make trade-offs like, do I want my information to be more private but extract less value from it, or am I okay with releasing my data privacy to like a guild or directly to the advertiser, and having that choice be in the user's hands rather than a choice mandated by a platform that you're locked into by a network effect. So some of the big questions we're looking at is like, one, what kinds of applications that can we build off ZK KYC? And so that's going to be similar to what people have been thinking about around like WorldCoin or around other kinds of anonymous KYC. And we think there's a ton that you can unlock when you're able to verify a proof of humanity and give like sort of a minimal level of Sybil resistance. Another more specific to data guilds is, what is the best trade-off between heterogeneity and homogeneity in the groups? In this case, we mostly talked about heterogeneous groups where the benefit is that you don't have to find a group that has interests similar to yours necessarily, which makes it easier to switch providers or switch guilds if you'd like to. But the benefit of homogeneity is that if you're part of a group that's designated by either like a physical area or an online community like a DAO, or a sort of looser online community like the followers of like a given influencer or a Substack, that allows the opportunity to better fund club goods in that domain. So that makes the aggregation of the financial value a little bit easier. And then the last one is, what level of privacy do we maintain in this system? And ideally, there are different options for users who care about different amounts of privacy. But an idea we've been floating around is actually having a recursive snark involved in the process, so that a user receives some attestation that they've taken a particular action or that they fit some demographic profile. You could even use like ZK email for that. And then the model we were talking about here is the user provides like a ZK proof of that. The guild sees that from the user, so they can kind of map the user to like roughly a profile, if not necessarily like literal data of like, you like this post. And then the guild passes that on. An alternative model is that there is like a model describing the entire guild. A user submits a proof that they have interacted with a given platform in some way, and then they take a proof of all the information from the guild so far, add their data, and prove that they accurately updated the model and send that on. So there's potentially work to be done there. The trouble with that right now is that eventually you have to like serve ads to users whom they're relevant to, and so that's kind of like a roadblock in terms of like having to de-anonymize the user at some point to determine which ads are relevant to them. But that's kind of an example of how there are potentially even stronger trade-offs you can make in terms of privacy versus value capture. So to start off with, are there any questions on any of these topics? Yeah.
Most fundamental one. So ZK tech is magic to me in the first place. I trust that it's like you can do what it says you can do. It sounds too good to be true, and I'm wondering. I'm always curious, and I've asked people who have expressed some interesting thoughts around it, but no like clear solutions for the difference between like ownership and possession of data.
Mm.
So what might be any possibilities to like reclaim data that you put out on loan or given access to in a way that, because it's like possession
Right.
9/10 of the law effectively like especially in use cases like social media and data that you need to interact with applications to give them access to things, but you want to be able to rescind permissions. I'd just be interested to hear any thoughts or solutions or problems around that.
Yeah. I was thinking nullifiers for this. Do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of approaches that I can think of here. One is, I mean, you should touch on nullifiers, but one thing I was considering is like, there's also a model which hasn't really been explored a lot, which is that you never give your data. You just like, they say, oh, we would serve this to you if you were type X, and we would serve this to you if you were type Y, and we would serve this to you if you were type Z, and you just prove that you were served correctly to your data, and you never reveal whether you were X or Y or Z. And that way you never actually show your data. You just show that, yep, I saw the right thing, but you never actually even give access. And so that's kind of one interesting idea where you never even have to revoke that permission. In practice, if you want like minimal changes to existing platforms, and there are a number of interesting explorations around like, yeah, like how do you revoke that? You can imagine that you want to comment on the nullifiers?
Yeah, so one other model is that there's a thing you can do called submitting a nullifier. So this is how, like, for instance, Tornado Cash works, where you, what is it? I think like you can deposit money and then withdraw money, but and this is all done with ZK, so anonymously. But obviously, you don't want to let people withdraw the same amount of money twice. So what happens is you can generate what's called a unique nullifier, where you submit a proof that like, I have decided this is nullified now, like this can't be used anymore. And so once that's been submitted, and there's also a mechanism by which like you can't submit duplicate nullifiers. And so that makes it so that like there's a verification publicly that like this data is not like valid anymore.
And also like another interesting project that's working on like reclaiming existing data. There's this project from PSC called TLS Notary. And there's other like sort of related approach to the same thing where basically you can prove that you've been served some specific like website data over some like TLS or HTTPS connection and extract specific pieces of information. And so that's one way of basically being able to reclaim like at least like, oh, like I posted this thing once, or like I have X number of followers. But for the most part, I think it is very hard to get this back. Like this is kind of the secret sauce of basically every platform is that they have this and they like won't give it to you. So.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, good question. So this is easier if the guild is somehow homogeneous in that, yeah, it's like someone's following or DAO, physical group, any kind of like affiliation group. In that case, you can benefit from one, the money flowing into like a centralized place, such that it's not as logistically difficult to hand out like microtransactions to each person. So there's that like economy of scale a little bit. And then also you have the option naturally to use that money to fund some kind of club good or something that's valuable to that group beyond what it would be to just like assign private amounts of money to people individually. With more heterogeneous groups, that's harder. And I think we don't have like a great solution for that yet. So that's still kind of like an open area of research.
Yeah, like one specific thing is like you can think of these as like insurance pools for people. Like if you have some community that collects some money month over month, and there's just some sort of policy where like if one community member is in some sort of distress situation, that like the pool will be allocated to them. It can be used, yeah, in a way that like if everyone got $8 or something, like it wouldn't be that useful, but like this one person getting a big sum of money for 1 month can be like life-changing. And in general, I think we're just hopeful that there's like some set of basically new purchases or a new sort of like infrastructure that communities would be able to build if they had ownership over their own data and the money that was collected from it.
because the system is completely composable with any existing governance primitive, you can use other models that are being brainstormed for funding the commons and just bolt them on top of this and say this is how the money is going to be distributed. It can be via ZK voting or whatever you would like as well.
I'm not sure if there's other sort of questions.
Oh yeah, I think there's two more. Yeah, maybe back there. Yeah, so it's a good question on like discrimination versus inclusion and like a social graph settings. So there's a couple approaches here. So one is like we're trying to work with people who are like particularly knowledgeable about this. One of the people helping out with the data guilds is like working in communities where a lot of people are discriminated against, and the hope is that we can come up with a design in which when this is implemented in practice, it like actually watches out for the interests of everyone. And I think keeping that in mind in the entire design process will help. I think the other thing is that like compared to the status quo, having a ZK system is already like infinitely less discriminatory than an existing system in which a platform can just decide I don't like content type Y or personality type Z, and I'm just not going to serve data. And in this case, because it's in ZK, you can say like, well, look, I was served the right data and I can prove that to you, but you actually make it harder for people to discriminate because they just don't know enough properties about you to be able to discriminate against you. I don't know if you guys have other things to add. Cool. Yeah.
I guess like so on the data guild point, like I love the idea and think behind data guilds. One of the questions that often comes up is like because it's this microtransaction game, you're almost playing like customer acquisition cost balance of like because it's a microtransaction, I need to have customer acquisition cost that's like lower than whatever the amount of money I'm gonna get from these. And like these big platforms tend to have like the ability to like lower their customer acquisition cost or just capture more and more value over a long time because they have like ability to lock in or a bunch of other things. One way to get around that is like really good discovery mechanisms. I'm wondering like is the tech at a point where like there's really good like I can broadcast like hey I would like to be involved in these kind of guilds, or like I can broadcast to somebody else to run a guild like hey I'm looking for people who have this set of criteria that I'm interested in bringing on board in a way that doesn't like undermine the whole zero knowledge program.
Interesting. Okay, so for the recording, the question was around like how can you like effectively onboard people into the system without leaking their anonymity, and yeah, how can you continue to offer the system and onboard people in a way that actually allows you to displace big tech? I guess that's accurate.
Yeah, so I guess like
yeah.
Is there good discovery mechanisms for like me being able to aggregate a bunch of people who are still want to preserve their privacy, but still be able to broadcast that like
Mm-hmm.
I'd be interested in joining data guild.
Right.
This set of criteria.
Yeah, so you can imagine like at least I can see of two ways to do this, and I'm sure you guys have other ideas. Is like one is each group could broadcast like this is a specific interest we're looking for, so people in like I don't know this specific province like come join this group, and you only reveal that one piece of data, and then people for that province join that group, and they're okay revealing that data and being served things in that province, but not they can't select on anything else, and so. Okay, great. Yeah, I don't know if there's any.
What we're building addresses this specifically in a complementary fashion.
So yeah, excited to explore more synergies.
Cool. Do we have time for one more question? Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Good question. So the question is about like how do you verify that like the platform isn't actually just like taking your data anyway. I think the answer for this is that like you can have the client that the user interacts with to send this data to the guild be open source. And that can be totally separate from the platform. Like the platform doesn't want to reveal their secret sauce in terms of like the TikTok algorithm or whatever. But this would just be a client for getting your data to the guild, and then the guild releasing it. So both the software that runs on the user's machine and that the guilds run, I think it's fine for those to be open source.
I just want to say this is a really great question, and I think it's definitely going to be something that ZK runs into for the next few years. The nice thing about cryptography is that it's pretty much meaningless unless it's open source, especially when it comes to something like circuits. You want to be able to know that like the sort of proof you're generating actually corresponds to some claim. But ultimately that breaks down to just like human auditors reading this circuit and being like, yeah, this seems good to go. So it's like a actually decently messy problem for a field that claims to be very like mathematical and pure. And I don't know how it's going to be solved. I think it's going to be a real stretch to try to actually convince users that this is like meaningfully different from just like trusting Google engineers. Like now you're just trusting cryptographers instead. And is that very different? I don't know.
Yeah, and the final point, if people realize that someone in community realizes that some provider is not acting honestly, then you have the option of voice or exit, because this whole guild system is permissionless. And so anyone can be like, I don't like privacy of that guild, I'm going to spin up my own that has this additional feature. And ZK proofs are publicly verifiable, so the hope is that can help. Sweet. Yeah, so ultimately it's hard to verify that unless all the data is client side. So the hope with all these signatures is that your data is only on your computer and is never sent to the guild computer. You only send ZK proofs of recursive proofs of aggregation. So data never needs to be deleted is our whole thesis. Is like, because there's no way to retract the data once you've given it, you just never give the data. Sweet. All right, thank you for coming to the talk. We appreciate it. We'll be down here, ask questions.